The ship, truth be told, they had long ago earmarked it for such a day they hoped would never come. Launched it just themselves, a bag of toys and books and blankets, a handful of credits, the clothes on their backs, pointed the navicomputer along a vector that would take them way out of range, so they hoped, and buckled in for the ride. But now, the ship had barely survived the initial trip. Escaping to wild space had been a desperate move, but was far from the endgame. It was supposed to be where they could hide just for a while, take the time to make a plan and plot a course. Those options now seemed decidedly more limited as they floated adrift. They'd escaped Jakku only to... what? Die in the cold reaches of space. The old freighter now nothing but a tomb for the three of them. Lost forever on the outskirts of the galaxy, their passing unmourned, their names unremembered. Dathan, Miramir, Ray. The freighter's interior was as old and battered as the exterior. The flight deck was cramped and functional. The old-fashioned design requiring not just pilot and co-pilot, but navigator, the third seat at the back of the cabin, facing away from the forward viewports. For this trip, they'd had to make do with a crew of just two. The pilot's seat was occupied by a young woman, her long blonde hair corralled loosely with a blue tie that matched the color of her cloak. The sleeves of her cream tunic rolled up as she leaned over the control console in front of her. One hand gripping the uncooperative yoke, the other flying over buttons and switches as she fought to control the shuddering ship. The forward view, as seen through the angled, heavily scratched, transparasteel viewport, showed the starscape ahead sliding diagonally as the freighter's spin accelerated. Behind her, a young man, his dark hair short, the beginnings of a beard over his jaw, knelt on the decking behind the navigator's seat. His arms were wrapped around it and its small occupant, the child cradled in a padded nest formed out of a bright, multicolored blanket, a stark contrast with the drab, greasy gunmetal of the flight deck. The man craned his neck around as he watched his wife wrestle with the controls. Then he stood and leaned down to kiss the head of the 6-year-old girl strapped securely in the seat, a large pair of navigator's sound-deadening headphones over her ears. In front of the girl, the ancient navigation panel, a square matrix of hundreds of individual tiny square lights, flashed in multicolored patterns of moving shapes. A simple game the girl's mother had loaded into the auxiliary computer to keep her daughter occupied on the long journey. The man looked up at the game board, but the girl had stopped playing. He moved around to the front of the chair and saw she had her eyes screwed tightly shut. He leaned in, embracing his daughter. "I've got you," Dathan whispered to Ray. "We're all right. I've got you." There was a bang. Dathan felt it as much as he heard it as another part of the strained engines gave up, the small explosion reverberating through the ship. A tear ran down from Ray's closed eyes. Dathan wiped it away and closed his own eyes, wishing that for once a little good luck would come their way. "Okay, there we go," Miramir yelled, following her statement with a whoop of triumph. The ship jolted once, and then the steady shaking stopped. Through the forward viewports, the stars were now completely still. Despite himself, despite their situation, Dathan found himself smiling. He couldn't help it. His wife was a genius, and he loved her. He didn't know where she got it from, but she was a natural, like it was genetic. She could fly anything, had been and still was a self-taught engineer and inventor. Tinkering, Miramir called it, as though it were nothing. As though she didn't realize just how special her talents were. In the years that he had known her, Dathan had often asked where this gift had come from, but Miramir would just shrug and say her grandmother was a wonderful woman. Dathan knew that to be true. He had met her, several times before Mir gave up her life in the twilight forest of hypercar.